And I would like to hand over to our moderator, Eugene, to take us through this very important discussion on security when using the cloud. Eugene, is there a way around not using cloud? Who can afford to stay away? And if you can't stay away, what can you do to remain secure?
Thank you, Anisha. Thank you to the audience. As we're moving into a more mature manufacturing space, it's becoming more and more prevalent in how we manage these threats and how they affect us and the engagement that we have those. Can we avoid them for the short term and medium term? I guess it depends on how fast we mature our manufacturing processes. In a lot of cases, we're bringing robotics into it, to physical PLCs that now run some of these manufacturing processes. These devices, in most cases, need to talk outward. They need to talk to the cloud. They need to be able to engage and report back on maintenance needed. They need to report back on production capacities, production deliveries. And with all of these communication strategies, you have risk imposed, and you've got to put strategies in place and kind of have your idea of how you're going to mitigate those things. With the recent ransomware, of course, any open environment that you have or any communication you have exposes you to ransomware and threats similar to that. Any data that you move, in the end, a virus or ransomware or an attack comes through as data, and you have to be able to distinguish between what is relevant and what is not. So myself, I look after AVI, which is a major manufacturing company within the in South Africa, at least, and the surrounding countries. We have 17 plants running locally, and those plants obviously communicate with each other as well as internally and externally to suppliers and maintenance support staff and that. I think before we delve a bit deeper into that, maybe just some background and some introductions, or maybe a bit more deeply from my co-panelists here. So, I mean, I think if we can maybe start, Oriyomi, maybe just something from your side.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you so much for the introduction. So myself is Oriyomi Fowler, and currently head of information security and network services for Dangote Group, which is one of the biggest conglomerates in Africa. We've got quite a number of presence in, I would say, about 12 countries and over 80 to 100 sites, that we have physical presence in. I'll hand over to Remy now. Hi, Remy.
Hello, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Yeah, it's nice to be here. My name is Remy Afon. I'm the president of Cybersecurity Expert Association of Nigeria. Into cybersecurity, I've got about 15 years experience in information technology, about 10 years ground up in cybersecurity. Currently focused on cloud security, adoption of cloud, DevSecOps, and helping organizations integrate security as early as possible in their software development lifecycle. Currently consulting for a couple of banks in the United Kingdom. So it's good to be here today.
Thank you, Remy. I think let's maybe delve into it. And then I guess the top topic that we're kind of discussing here is cloud adoption and the major concerns that we kind of see with some of these risks that are posed in it. Outside of the initial adoptions that we kind of got into, cyber risk and the initial security, a bigger kind of governance and control and compliance kind of discussion extends from that. And as we bring our manufacturing plants online, we bring our corporate businesses online, more and more of the engagement and the handover of that security to an external party is something that we constantly have to manage and be concerned with. I guess from my panelists, do you have an opinion on how to actively manage a third party with the security, and what would you put in place to kind of drive these agendas to ensure that you are safe and you are protected and the necessary is being done to kind of adhere to that?
Okay, so I would go first. Okay, so one of the major things with third parties is, you need to have contractual agreements. You need to have an agreement, where you engage them and you check what they do, their processes, and you're trying to be sure that they follow the security regulations, they follow best practices, and security is one of the major things that they look at in terms of an organization, because if not, no matter policies you put in place on your side, your vendors are practically a very big security risk to the organization. And it's important that we do that. So I would say regulation is one major thing. The other thing is you need to have proper demarcation in terms of what they're expected to deliver. You do a practical check. So I'll give an example. You have got vendors for probably maybe UPSs or public cameras. One of the major things you should do is to ensure that you do like a vulnerability assessment of those devices that are coming in before you even plug them into your network. We always have those issues where you'd see that vendors will come and try to deploy equipment that are probably at the end of life, all in the name of the cameras working, or they try to bring UPSs that are not monitorable, and at the same time they are open to vulnerabilities in the organization. I think those two major things are, call it out for me.
Okay, Remy, your side.
Yeah, sure. I quite very much agree with Yomi. The first thing you need to do is third-party security assessment. It's quite key. When you because nowadays a lot of integration are taking place between organizations and their third party. We see a situation whereby we have a lot of API integration into your system because you want to be able to talk to your third party and be able to gather data from them or send data to them. So you need to do a thorough security assessment of all these third parties. And one other thing what's quite important is to be able to know what kind of standard are you going to use to perform your third party security assessment. There are so many standards in place. We've got NIST, we've got the Cloud Security Alliance, kind of template that you can use and modify to suit your organization. So you need to understand the risk that the third party is bringing up into your system. And once you understand that, you'll be able to treat that risk accordingly. Also, like you mentioned, you need to be able to do security assessment as well in terms of penetration testing, to be able to understand the weaknesses that are there and be able to, as quickly as possible, solve this problem before the hackers get to know about this. And talking about that, a lot of compromise has taken place in terms of third parties that get integrated into organizational systems. And we've got a lot of breaches taking place. We got cyber attack in 2017 that affected a cargo facility shipping AP giants, and it cost the company about 300 million. You understand what happened when we had the 2017 as well, WannaCry and NotPetya ransomware attacks, and most recently a lot of ransomware attacks that are taking place. All these are happening via third parties because the third parties are more like the weakest link. So if you have all the controls in place in your organization, what kind of vulnerabilities the third party bringing in? So it's quite key for you to make sure that you assess your third parties, you understand their risk profile, and be able to act accordingly.
Very valid. And I guess from a third party, the unknown is always the challenge that we have. And it speaks to the risk-based approach, as you mentioned. And in most of these cases, assessing the risk is also building layers into the system. So having various layers of protection so that if any single layer fails, another layer can kind of take over the next layer or the next section of protection. And as we evolve, we no longer can really air gap our facilities from the internet. We have to have that communication flowing. In your mind, speaking to maybe ISO 27000 or NIST, what are the typical thought patterns that you would follow to when you kind of expose the risk, or at least assess the risk that you have to be exposed? You have to have this external communication going, whether it is for telemetric data for third parties. How would you kind of step through that process of not air gapping it, but allowing the access, but assessing the criticality and the need to have multiple layers of protection in place. Remy, do you want to take that maybe?
I'll take that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you mentioned ISO 27001. You know, it's got a lot of controls in place, and one way to do that is to look at all the controls that ISO has got, using it as an example. You can use NIST, you can use any other framework, and try to understand your third party. What kind of controls have they got in place? Obviously, you're going to discover that there are some weaknesses that they've got. You should be able to identify that. And that's why you have to have a kind of risk management process in place. Do you want to accept that risk? Do you want to mitigate it? Or do you want to really avoid, doing business with that third party as a whole? So that's quite critical. Then also you have to be able to manage your third party. Like you mentioned, there must be layers of controls in place within the organization. What kind of access are you granting your third parties? You have to restrict the access. It has to be based on what they need to perform within for example, if you want to integrate a third party API into your system, that'll just be transferring a kind of data to you. So you just have to restrict it to the type of data they need to transfer and give them the limited access to be able to do that. And from time to time, be able to monitor your login and monitoring, so that even if there is a compromise, you are able to quickly detect those compromises are hacked accordingly. And that will bring you to your incident response process within your organization. It's not a matter, the fact is that it's not that there's not going to be a cyber attack, but it's just a matter of when it's going to happen. So when it happens, how are you going to respond to it? So some organizations do have a separate unit for third-party security assessment, because they take it very seriously. Like, for example, if you have some critical data, sensitive data, or personal data, is it going to impact your regulation? Where is your data being stored? Is your data being stored outside your region? For example, if you are in Europe, there's GDPR. So if your data is being stored outside Europe, so that becomes a regulatory issue. So you have to be really concerned about that and be able to put a lot of things in place and understand what's happening to your data, how's your data being processed, and where is it being stored. So those are the things that are quite important. But most importantly, ensure that you have layers of security within your organization as well. An incident response process in place, so that if there's a cyber attack, you are able to tackle that problem as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And also identify the exposure and the criticality of that information that has been exposed. So absolutely, to your point. Oriyomi.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Basically, cyber attacks on critical OT infrastructure has really grown, strategically in the last few years. In recent time, we've had over 2,000%. In terms of attacks, and the attacks have gone from nuclear plants all the way to water treatment. There was a water treatment issue that happened in Florida, if I remember correctly. They're trying to poison the water, using cyber attack as against physically coming there to physically poison the water. So there are quite a number of things that might have caused this. This is because for a very long time, industries and OT and IT has really been staying as a standalone. And IT guys, or should I say cybersecurity guys, have not really focused on OT and looking at security, because OT is just within a particular location. That's back in the day. But as you said, now OT is required to really be connected, because for historical reason, for maintenance issues, or issues that may come around, looking at how you could maintain or preventive maintenance. So it is very important they connect. And I would quite a number of other things that we always forget, the BYODs. We always look at BYOD as something that is not really important, but that is very key, because people use different kind of devices to access your network or access your services, which has to do with either VPN into your network, or probably using email service. So those things are really major things of what we need to look at and why OT and IT has to converge. In terms of best practices that people are required to do, on top of my head, I would say there are four major things that would guarantee at least 98 to 99%, because really we can never really be totally safe. So I would say 98 to 99%. And first thing is, applying a robust privilege credential management practice. No password sharing, no using properly, using a PAM or a PIM to ensure that your privileged users are properly safeguarded and they cannot access without doing your regular multi-factor. That's the first thing. The second thing is understanding IT security and OT security. A lot of times, quite a number of times I've heard that a lot of people just assume that because you're an IT security guy, you understand OT security. But it takes a lot to really understand how the OT works and understand how to secure it. There's one major thing that people always ignore. So it is important that we really understand these two things and know where the security gaps could be within the OT space and how it could affect the company, because most of the OT are legacy systems of 20 to 25 years ago, using quite a number of modular plugins to ensure that they could expose the historian outside. Nobody's going to change their plans because of historical data or preventive maintenance. They would rather prefer to have the engineer physically on site to do that. But, looking at the way things are going in terms of work from home, hybrid work setup, the pandemic has forced us to really do digital transformation as against do the traditional way where people have to fly in to come and do preventive maintenance. It is very important that the CISOs or information security guys of every organization understands the difference of IT and OT. And then my next point would be remote access. Your remote access tools have got to be top-notch, multi-factor setup, ensuring that not just any user could do VPNs and not just any VPN users could access important resources. Because, a lot of times we just look at, laptop getting compromised, credentials getting compromised. What if a user get compromised? Somebody walks into your house, you are forced to log in, then what happens? So we need to ensure that we are able to even mitigate, even after someone has VPN access. You could combine that with quite a number of things like the PIM or the PAM, depending on what it is. You could combine it with that, which has a workflow that ensures that you require an approval, even if you're on VPN connectivity connection to access important credentials. And the last but not the least is, I would say, zero trust. Zero trust has been around for quite a while, if I must say, about around with different names. First approach was to use NAC, which identifying IPs. Other times it was what the Forrester coined the name zero trust. While they were doing their research, was it 2014, looking at what the next thing should be. So, but the major thing as of today, it is not about IP addresses any longer. It is not what IP the user is connecting from. It's about identifying. When you're able to identify the service, identify the user, identify what the user can do, it ensures that you could align your network, whether people are accessing it from remote or on-premise, and you could totally segment your OT and then do like a little bit of boxing, whitelisting to ensure that this exact type of service is only what is allowed to access this. So even if, for instance, Yomi is allowed to speak in this conference, I cannot say some certain word, because if I say it, there's a policy in between, there's a policy manager in between that stops audience from hearing that. That's me trying to bring it home for people to understand, as against, IP to say, oh, Yomi is on the conference, can't say anything. I could say anything, but there's a policy manager in between that picks up that and removes that malicious traffic for it to get to the destination, which clearly means that if you have that, even if there are malicious users with malicious intent, with the right access, they won't still be able to do malicious activities on the infrastructure. Thank you.
And you make a very valid point. I mean, as legacy equipment in these manufacturing spaces now start merging, you find the OT side is very much a product tangible type of environment. You touch the product, you touch the machines. Whereas in the IT side, in the IT security side, it's a logical thing. It's a virtual item that we deal with. And now bringing this together, where you have these new advanced PLCs, advanced manufacturing equipment coming in, you have technicians and coders in the space that doesn't have the same mindset and philosophy of security that you used to see in the security side. And merging these two becomes more and more difficult. And bringing them together it's a new team, it's a new type of thinking, a new mode of engaging in the cyberspace, and ensuring that whatever is built in that environment follows the same discipline that we would follow in the normal corporate type environment, that the proper IT sec side and not the OT sec side. When you move that into the cloud, you made a very valid point there. Our ability to identify becomes more problematic when you run cloud solutions, because these cloud providers don't necessarily record the IP and the related SIEM information necessarily, the information of connectivity, the individual movement within that space. Monitoring and managing systems and cyber systems around cloud-based solutions. Do you believe there's a advancement needed? Do you believe there's a different type of thinking needed of how we monitor and manage these cyber attacks and cyber initiatives around cloud-based services? Because these are critical workloads in the end. The critical workload in the plant has a tangible output that we lose. And of course, when the company goes down, the company goes down. If a port shuts down or a ship shuts down, it's tangible millions we're losing there. How do you see cyber management systems playing a part, and a better part, in managing these cloud type solutions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Eugene. You said the threats to critical infrastructure and industrial automation are kind of increasing in severity and frequency. And that's because digitalization is driving what I call industrial Internet of Things, which is opening up a lot of new attack vectors. So we have smart sensors, robots, motors, electric power frequency converters, and other connected devices through the modern OT environment. So these are kind of generating a lot of data, large quantities of data. So analyzing those data normally brings about benefits, but also it opens us a lot of attack for cyber criminals. So, and when you now have the mix of cloud into it, then it becomes a very serious issue. Looking at top cloud security threats, number one on the list is the data breaches. Data breaches happens from time to time, and it's quite top in terms of cloud security threats. When your data get breached, you might lose personal information, you might lose sensitive information, intellectual property. Most of these manufacturing companies, they do have, manufacturers have some intellectual property they really want to protect. You don't want, criminals to have access to it or competitors to have access to it. We've seen a situation whereby ransomware attackers try to steal you, apart from encrypting your system or your data, they steal your information and say, if you don't pay this amount of money, we are going to, paste the information on the dark web. We are going to post the information openly on the internet for people to see. And imagine a situation whereby your intellectual property is part of that data that the cyber criminal has got. That's going to affect you seriously. So it's not a matter of just encrypting your data and saying, okay, we've got backup, we can restore from the backup. They can obviously hold you to ransom and say, okay, we've got your information and this is evidence that we've got it. We're going to post it in the dark web or post it on the internet. Just recently, I was working with an organization that got attacked by a denial of service attack. So they were sending a lot of packet to them to make them unavailable. And this kind of organization needs to be online to be able to, make their money. If they're offline, because it's e-commerce company. So if they're offline for like 5-10 minutes, they are losing a lot of money. So, and they were offline for more than a day. The attackers were sending denial of service attack to them and telling them that you have to pay a ransom, in Bitcoin. And if you don't pay it, then they will continue to attack you. And they say, okay, we don't want to pay, and trying to resolve that problem. But, after like 24 hours, they increase the money again. So those are the kind of things that organizations do face. So when you move your data into cloud, apart from the data breaches, you also think about some other traditional things like insider threat as well. I just mentioned denial of service attack, insecure configurations. That's one of the things that an organization face, because now when we are talking about cloud, moving your information into cloud, there is a shared responsibility. The cloud provider has got their own responsibility. You as an organization has got your own responsibility as well. In terms of the security of the cloud, the cloud provider has to make sure that there is the security of the cloud. But what about security in the cloud? You have to make sure that all your configurations are done properly, and you take care of your security within the cloud. Otherwise, if there is a misconfiguration, then that can expose you to an attacker. So those are the considerations that we need to take at the back of our mind when we are migrating in the cloud, and also considering the OT.
Thank you. Remy.
Hi. Oh, thank you for the question. Question kind of interesting. As Remy has said, one of the major things you need to look at is understanding what cloud is really, because quite a number of times you listen to people and they say, oh, because you're on the cloud, you're safe. As Remy has said, the only thing the provider is responsible for is the physical, ensuring your servers don't just physically disappear from the data center. But apart from that, everything else within the network, within the, the VMs, the storage, everything is still your responsibility. So in a lot of times, most of the security controls you have on-premise, you have to migrate them to cloud also, because that's the only way that you can continue, to ensure that you have those. And, quite a number of those things are things around identity management and the likes. So I would say the other point would be on misconfiguration of cloud storage. Over the years, I've had quite a number of friends, or should I say colleagues, subscribe to like, a cloud service provider, using S3 buckets and the likes, and you think it's safe. Because you have S3 bucket doesn't mean, it's not open to the public. So you need to put the proper access restriction. You need to, configure your, security groups on the infrastructure to ensure that it's fine. The other angle that I would like to, mention is on API. API, security is very key. Quite a number of people just think, oh, my API is on SSL alone, I'm fine. Insecure APIs would become a major thing from this year going forward. Insecure APIs are one thing that always happen, and when you don't have you have inadequate authentication, insufficient authorization in terms of what the API does. Instead of building APIs that are generic, you need to be more specific, so that users don't, or should I say malicious users, don't use it wrongly. One other thing in terms of this will be about 𝐂𝐻𝐧𝐠 2.0. Quite a number of people mix that up with single sign-on because they're totally two different things. When you go to a site that uses 𝐂𝐻𝐧𝐠 2.0, one of the major things that you see there is authenticate via Google. People don't understand what that implication means. What that implication is, once you authenticate, you mean if you don't check what it is and then you're building the same thing and you go copy, it means you're sharing data in terms of pictures, in terms of locations, informations that are really not required at those points in time. So when you're integrating with third parties, you need to be very sure when you're integrating with them, because it's all easy to say, oh, authenticate via AD. But when you authenticate via Microsoft or Azure AD, there are some other attributes that the users can ask for. And then if you willingly give them those information, because you just assume, oh, it's Microsoft takes care of that bit, you know, you would have to be liable for quite a number of things. Other points will be around, you know, intellectual properties or loss, as Remy has said. It is very key that we keep our data are not altered, they are not deleted, or we don't lose access to them, which is, you know, entirely falls under denial of access. One of the other points is, you know, we need to ensure that we have data loss prevention, you know, tools that could meet our business requirements and ensure that we are fine. One other point I would like to talk about is loss of control. People have this mindset that you don't have control immediately you subscribe to the cloud. The answer is, yeah, you don't have physical control, but you have virtual control. So you still have some level of control, and you know, you could use those level of controls to do what you require or what you need. So every business needs to consider what is required before they jump on, oh, this is the next trend. The next trend is cloud. You need to really see if those things apply. The other bit that companies need to really look at is the data sovereignty, regulations around that within their country. If you don't double check, I understand that in South Africa, you've got this strong POPI Act that you have to, you know, always be checking, because I think they're kind of policing you more than anything with that regulation.
That's it.
So it is very key. You just don't subscribe to cloud service and say, oh yeah, East Virginia, because you want to subscribe to cloud service. You know, regulatory body would come after you, and you know, you have to be very sure that that's what the business needs and the business is ready. You also need to read between the fine print, you know, the terms and conditions, the fonts, size of, you know, terms and conditions that will be sent across. That is very key. Because in a lot of situations that we could see all over in the internet and in some places, it has to do with customers assuming that the cloud provider has some responsibilities over either they don't do proper zoning, which means the services may not be available. Also, in terms of your service can go offline. Just because it is in the cloud doesn't still mean your service will run continuously. So you still have to treat it high availability the exact way you treat it on premise. Now it's just over a mouse instead of, you know, physical devices, and you just do that over a mouse and over a screen. So those are points I would say I would like to give now.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It covers quite a broad area there, I guess. But in closing, I mean, we've run out of time, so it's maybe just to extend to what you've said. That yes, POPI has come into effect in South Africa. I guess with the cyber attack, the biggest thing that we lose is control of our own data. It's taken over by another entity in another place and space necessarily. And dealing with a third country and getting your data controlled or getting that individual essentially addressed by the authorities is not always as easy as that, because each country is not as mature as the next one might necessarily be. In South Africa, as an example, we've only enforced or started enforcing POPI this year. So it's a fairly new law. It hasn't been properly tested yet. And that goes for a lot of countries. It's not just the African countries. Yes, we find that GDPR is definitely more enforced. It's more entrenched. And it does play to where we want to get to. But we've got a long way to go when we lose control of the data and we want to persecute or at least address the criminality or criminal aspects of it. Gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate your participation today. I think we're going to close off. Do you have any final remarks? Remy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So my final remark is, you know, for organizations to have their own, you know, security policy and strategy in place, you know, to be able to ensure their data security and intellectual property protection, you know, all those things that we just mentioned, like, you know, patents, you know, making sure that they have patents for their products have copyrights, trademarks, their trade secrets have been properly secured, have confidential agreements in place, have confidentiality agreements for your employees and consultants, terms of service and privacy policy. All these things are quite key, to ensure that you are properly protected.
Thank you. Remy?
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for that point, Remy. On my own closing remark will be, just understanding what your requirements are. There are quite a number of standards out there. We can't all those standards don't apply to everybody. You need to clearly understand what is required by the business. You need to feel the pulse of the business, understand what it is critical and very, very top niche for the business, and then pick up quite a number of standards, combine them, and play around with them to ensure that you are able to fix, or should I say mitigate against the security controls that are required within the organization. And while you're adopting cloud and integrating with OT, please do try to understand it properly, to the nitty-gritty understanding in terms of what is required, what should be allowed, and read the regulations. And thank you all for listening in. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Anisha, with that, I'm handing back to you.
Thank you, Eugene, for taking us through this discussion on cybersecurity in the cloud. Of course, very informative and very topical. Thank you so much for sharing this discussion.